Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa. Here are your headlines on the continent tonight. Nigerian security forces are on the hunt for the Kagara kidnappers. 42 people are still missing after an attack on a school on Wednesday. Uganda's military chief apologizes after soldiers were found guilty of attacking journalists. 7 men were sentenced to up to 3 months behind bars for their actions. And finally, 100,000 people have officially died of COVID-19 across the African continent. We take a closer look at the health situation in the Kenyan capital. Let's start with the latest on the Kagara kidnappings. Nigerian security forces say they're hunting down armed men who attacked a school on Wednesday, deploying the army, the police, and a helicopter. 42 people remain missing, including 27 students. 1 pupil was killed in the assault. Relatives of the missing are anxiously waiting for news, as you'll see in this next report by Nicolas Germain.
This is the school in central Nigeria where 42 people were kidnapped on Wednesday. Among them were 27 students, and their families are distraught. Nigeria's defense minister was widely criticized on Thursday after he urged Nigerians not to be cowards and to stand up to armed bandits. Many feel the government is not doing enough to stop these gangs.
Honestly, the security situation is so bad. To the extent, I don't know how this thing used to come, because I see no reason why, but people will come with motorcycle and they will enter a village, they hold their operation successfully, and they'll go without any challenge.
2 months ago, 300 students were kidnapped and later released in Katsina State. And in 2014, nearly 300 girls were abducted from Chibok by jihadist group Boko Haram. Some escaped, some have been released, but today, more than 100 of them are still missing.
Next to Uganda, where a military court has sentenced 7 soldiers to up to 90 days in jail for assaulting journalists. Army Chief General David Muhoozi has also apologized, adding that his institution does not condone such attacks. The violent assault took place Wednesday outside a UN office in Kampala, where journalists had followed opposition leader Bobi Wine for a story. Our correspondent Michael O'Hagan has more on the reactions from Ugandan journalism associations to these developments.
The journalist associations broadly welcomed the decision by the tribunal to sentence these soldiers for their actions. However, it was tinged with some scepticism. Although attacks by security forces against journalists in Uganda are very common, holding security officers to account is very rare. And senior journalists took to social media today to recall that in previous situations where courts, tribunals had purportedly punished military officers, in fact, those military officers had been quickly redeployed and in fact promoted. One journalist for a well-respected network described today's events as a hoax.
And Michael, could you remind us briefly what happened in the run-up to those attacks on Wednesday?
These attacks come not long after one of the bloodiest elections in Uganda's recent history. Elections started in November last year, and during street protests, security forces killed at least 54 people, according to the president, although other sources say the number is much higher than that. And there has been a consistent attempt by security forces to stop journalists doing their job.
And finally, tell us about the general state of press freedom in the country for both local journalists and foreign correspondents such as yourself.
Uganda ranks 125th out of 180 countries in terms of press freedom, according to the Paris-based Reporters Without Borders. Last month, the police chief said that journalists would be beaten for their own sake and that those beatings would continue. On the eve of elections, last month, the internet was cut off and social media remained cut off for a month because to try and limit what information was being spread.
Time now for a quick look at other news stories we're following for you tonight. Algeria's president has announced a major political shake-up. In his address to the nation, Abdelmajid Tebboune dissolved parliament, announced early legislative elections, and said he'll reshuffle his cabinet within 48 hours. He also pardoned dozens of activists who were jailed during the country's Hirak protest movement. The World Health Organization has announced that it will be shipping 11,000 Ebola vaccines to Guinea in the coming days. Sunday, authorities declared an outbreak in the country's southern Nzerekore region. So far, there are 3 confirmed cases of the highly contagious and deadly disease. WHO says that fast action is crucial to avoid the Ebola outbreak getting out of control during the COVID pandemic. Zimbabwe has kicked off its COVID vaccination campaign with donations from China. Vice President and Health Minister Constantino Chiwenga rolled up his sleeves and became the first person in the country to get a jab. Healthcare workers and customs officials were next in line. Earlier this week, 200,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine arrived in Zimbabwe. Now, some 100,000 people have officially died of COVID-19 across the African continent. In Kenya's capital alone, one study estimates that 35% of the population has been infected. To compare, 21% of Londoners are believed to have had the virus. The coronavirus death tolls in both cities, though, are starkly different. Our correspondents explain.
Within a year, more than 102,000 people have tested positive for coronavirus in Kenya. The figure may be far from the real number of total cases. One study suggests that 1.5 million people have been infected in Nairobi alone.
In Kenya and in Africa in general, we have been reporting relatively few cases. But when we went to look for antibodies, we found that 1 in 3, which is a big number. That suggests that the disease has been spreading quite a lot among the population, but not many people gotten sick enough to require to go to hospital.
Poor neighborhoods are most at risk. People here in Mpakazi live very close to one another. According to a Soros study, 60% of residents here have had coronavirus at some point. However, the number of new infections seem to be decreasing, which raises hopes that herd immunity may have been established.
Back in 2020, there was a spike increase, but in this, at the moment, I can see the number is going down. The number is going down because we are not seeing any cases that patients are coming with symptoms that are related to COVID-19.
Dr. Alwash is one of the most renowned pneumologists in Kenya. He says it's still too early to count on widespread herd immunity, as in other neighborhoods, past infection rates are around 35%.
So you have to get 75% of the whole world protected to produce sufficient herd immunity. In Nairobi also, you have to get 75% of the people. And in COVID-92, we still don't know how long the immunity lasts after infection. So you may get infected, but you don't know whether you produce sufficient herd immunity.
Kenya's primary hopes for tackling the pandemic rest on a planned vaccination campaign. The first doses should be delivered at the end of February.
And finally, swarms of locusts are back in northern Kenya. Aid agencies in the region report that the insects have been destroying crops and wiping out vegetation. The UN estimates that locust infestations could affect the livelihoods of 3.5 million people across East Africa in 2021. Even a small swarm eats the same amount of food in a day as 35,000 humans. Valerie De Kemp reports.
Shouting and banging metal pots to no avail. The swarm of locusts devours everything in its path. Potatoes and green beans used to grow here. Corn is all that is left. Without it, Jane Gatwuma fears she won't be able to feed her family and send her children to school.
Itamaliza juu ukiangalia, hebu angalia hii mahindi. Unaona hapa, hebu angalia.
The desert locusts began infesting the Horn of Africa in 2020, the grasshopper proliferating during the rainy season and invading at least 9 countries, including Kenya. The outbreak was briefly contained, but now authorities say new swarms have been detected. A fleet of planes has been deployed to identify the locusts and spray the swarm with pesticide. The region is already facing a so-called second wave of infestation, but authorities say they are much better prepared this time around.
So a year ago, in February 2020, we had 2 aircraft in Kenya able to spray and very, very minimal quantity of pesticide. Now in Kenya, we have 10 aircraft operating.
The continent has not seen a plague of this magnitude in over 70 years. According to FAO, more than 2.5 million people were severely affected by the locusts, a figure that could rise to more than 3 million.
That's it from the Iron Africa team. Stay tuned.